I am going to make a statement that I've been hesitant to make up to this point. And I've hesitated because I'm a historian and I want to be very circumspect about making present day parallels to the past. But because I've done more of the research, because I've studied this more in depth, I think I'm prepared to make it because now I think I have the data to back up my claim. And the statement is this: the claim I want to make is there is a direct line from the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan to modern day white Christian nationalism. There is a direct line from the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan to modern day white Christian nationalism. From the white supremacy, the xenophobia, the patriarchy, and the baptizing of it all in religious language. There is a direct line from the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan to white Christian nationalism. We're going to dig into that this episode of the Justice Briefing. I'm your host, Dr. Jamar Tisby. Thank you for joining us. If you're new here, this is the Reimagined podcast. I had a podcast called Footnotes. We have transitioned and evolved that into the Justice Briefing. And that's just one of the changes that I am making in this new season of my public work. I want to tell you more about the larger project of which the Justice Briefing is one part. I want you to join me this Sunday, December 7th, online at a vision casting meeting for Tisby Media. I am so excited to unpack and unlock this new endeavor and tell you all about it. So it's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern, Sunday, December 7th, live via Zoom. You can go to the link in the show notes, as well as any of my latest Substack articles, as well as any of the links in bio and my stories on Instagram. And you can find the registration link. It's completely free, but you do have to register. I'm excited. We've got over 150 people registered so far. I want you to join in that number. The vision casting meeting for Tisby Media this Sunday, December 7th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Register online and join us for that. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the Klan. I've been doing a deep dive, y'all. It started a couple of weeks ago. I needed an article that was kind of tailored to Thanksgiving. And unfortunately, what I came up with was the fact that the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan in the Jim Crow era happened on Thanksgiving Day. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But because of that, as I was researching for that article, which you can find at jamartisby.substack.com right now, as I was researching for that article, I went into this rabbit hole to learn more about the Klan. And in the process, it just became readily apparent, undeniably apparent, that this ideology of the most notorious white supremacist group in our nation's history has a lot of similarities to what modern day white Christian nationalism. So don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that everyone who subscribes to white Christian nationalist beliefs in the 21st century is the same as a Ku Klux Klan member in the 19th or 20th century. I'm not saying that all white Christian nationalists have this overt, specific hatred of black people. And I'm most certainly not saying that they would condone the racial terrorist activities of the Ku Klux Klan, the lynchings, the cross burnings, the arsons of black churches, the intimidation, you name it. I'm not saying that it is a one-to-one comparison. What I am saying is that if you repudiate the ideas and the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan, you must also repudiate the ideas and the ideology of white Christian nationalism because they're so similar, because they share a lot of the same DNA. Now, throughout this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the history of the Klan and specifically its ideology. I'll talk also about white Christian nationalism and its present day ideology. But history is the study of continuity and discontinuity. What is the same, but also what is different. And so there are some important differences between the Klan of the 20th century and white Christian nationalism in the 21st century. So again, I'm not making a one-to-one comparison here, and I'm not calling modern day adherents to white Christian nationalism Klan members. What I am saying is everything you dislike about the Klan has some echoes in the modern day white Christian nationalist movement. And if you want to reject what the Klan stood for, you must also reject what white Christian nationalism stands for. All right. So, with that preamble, let's get into this thing. By the way, I hope this is working. I should be live. This is another evolution that you are helping with as we build out the justice briefing. I asked for new subscribers to jamartisby.substack.com, my Substack publication, and a bunch of you stepped up. And because of that, I was able to purchase a new camera. We're looking at a Sony A7 IV with this depth of field, and we got this new light over here that's, it's one of those things where you can do all the colors in the color wheel. And so I've got it calibrated just right for my lovely chocolate skin tone. We got a little shadow effect going on over here. By the way, this thing up here, if you're watching, that's my computer. So if I'm looking a little bit off to the side, I'm just checking my notes here because I've got the receipts and I want to make sure I get some of this, all of this stuff right. And if you're watching this, I'm live streaming to not one, not two, but hopefully 3 different platforms right now. I am live streaming, I hope, on Substack and on Facebook. There's still a lot of folks who tune in on Facebook, and I should be on YouTube as well. So this is the evolution, y'all. I'm just trying to show you what your support does. There are tangible effects. And if I look clean right now, then that is because of your support. So let's get into it. Let's start with my favorite area, which is history. So if you've been following along my work, then you've heard me talk about the fact that there were 3 iterations of the Ku Klux Klan. The first one was right after the Civil War. Now, why would that be? Why would you need a white supremacist terrorist group forming right after the Civil War? Because this thing called emancipation and the 13th Amendment, and the fact that now you have 3.5 million black people who were formerly enslaved, now free. And white Southerners lost the Civil War, but they didn't lose their ideology of white supremacy. They lost the military battle, but they didn't think their ideas were wrong. They thought the Civil War was wrong. And they come up with this entire lost cause mythology to explain why the South lost and why the Confederates lost the Civil War, when the Confederates and the South supposedly stood for what was noble and right about the United States and about Christianity. And so they invent their heroes, their saints, if you will, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis, all of whom, by the way, on the front of the bas relief Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is the largest Confederate monument in the country. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. So they come up with this myth, and part and parcel of that myth is that it is a white man's country, and the upstanding white people needed to take the country back from northern liberals and from black people. So that's the ethos around the Ku Klux Klan forming right after the Civil War. The third iteration, and I'll come back to the second, but the third iteration of the Klan was during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, why would you need the Klan during the Civil Rights Movement? Because black people had the audacity to say, hey, we should be able to vote. We were promised the right to vote in the Reconstruction Amendments, and women finally got the franchise in the 19th Amendment. But it was all the way in the 1950s and 60s, and black people still could not vote by and large, especially in the South, because there were things like poll taxes where you had to pay to vote. And if you couldn't pay, you couldn't vote. There were things like literacy tests where you would get asked this random question about government or the Constitution, and the white racist poll tax worker could say whether you passed or didn't. And guess what? Nobody passed. Very few, right? And of course, there was racial terrorism that would keep you away from the polls. And so there's this civil rights movement. And in the midst of that civil rights movement, the Klan comes back. But the second iteration of the Klan was perhaps the most widespread and violent of the three waves. So let me tell you the story of the second wave of the Klan and the rebirth of the Klan in the Jim Crow era. It happened on Thanksgiving Day in 1915. But before we get to that day, let's talk about what's going on around that era. Earlier that year, a blockbuster film was released. It was called Birth of a Nation. It was a 3-hour silent film. It was also the first film shown in the White House. Allegedly, the president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, said it was like writing history with lightning. He loved it. And a lot of people around the country did too. It's called a blockbuster because there were lines around the block. And black people protested it. They saw it for what it was, a white propaganda film, which, by the way, was based off a series of white nationalist propaganda books as well. So, Birth of a Nation comes out earlier that year. Later that year, in the fall, is the lynching of Leo Frank, who was a Jewish man accused of the rape and murder of a young girl who worked in a factory that he managed. Now, the accusation was very spurious, and I do believe that he was posthumously pardoned almost a century later, but it was not. It was pretty clear he didn't do it. Nevertheless, he was arrested, but a lynch mob kidnapped him from jail, took him to the nearby town, and killed him. It was a lynching. And this anti-Semitic hatred was rife throughout the land. Now, it is in that context that a white man named William J. Simmons, who, by the way, used to be a Methodist preacher, but he was a disgraced Methodist preacher. They basically defrocked him. Simmons watches the movie, is a dyed-in-the-wool white supremacist. He gathers 19 of his white buddies on Thanksgiving Day, and at night they go up to the top of Stone Mountain, Georgia, and they perform a ceremony. They light a cross on fire. They build an altar, and on that altar they place 3 objects: a Bible, a flag, and a sword. A Bible, a flag, and a sword. Now, each of those symbols individually means its own thing. But what do they mean together? A Bible, a U.S. flag, and a sword. Which, by the way, the irony of going to the top of a Confederate memorial, which broke away from the United States, and putting a United States flag on this altar. Anyway, the dissonance is loud. What happened after that was, what those symbols are telling you is this flag represents not patriotism. And I do distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. I think patriotism is a healthy affection for the place where you're from. It is saying we have the best burgers, we have the best weather, we have the best sports fans. It's all in good fun. It's just an affiliation and an affection for where you live. It's also, I think, a concern for the well being of where you live, of your community, of your nation. In other words, you want to see your nation be better. My favorite line in the founding documents is toward a more perfect union. Patriotism says we can always do better. We can always be moving toward a more perfect union. That's to me what patriotism is. And so patriotism will also critique one's own nation because if it's not doing right, and you want to move toward a more perfect nation, then you got to call out what's not going right as you try to make positive change. That's different than nationalism. Nationalism isn't simply an affection for your nation. Nationalism says your nation is superior, says your nation is better than every other nation. And insidiously, the subtext of nationalism says that the people who are truly considered as belonging in society, in the case of the United States, the people who are truly American, they are better than everyone else too. So nationalism twists and poisons any sort of patriotic idea. And the US flag on that altar on Thanksgiving Day in 1915 at the rebirth of the Klan signified not patriotism, but nationalism. And then you have the Bible. The idea that God has blessed the nation specifically and uniquely. That the United States is somehow the apple of God's eye, that among all the other nations, God specially favors the United States. Why? Simply because you're there. Who knows? What makes the United States better than any other nation in God's eye? Who knows? But the Ku Klux Klan thought that the United States was a specially favored nation and was a Christian nation. From its foundations, thought it was a Christian nation. And then there's another object, the sword. We don't talk enough about the sword. In combination with the Bible and the US flag, what the Ku Klux Klan was saying is that they had a holy mission, a holy crusade that was sanctioned by God. And they pursued their mission with religious fervor. So much fervor that they were willing to shed blood, other people's blood, to accomplish their crusade. They were willing, you could even say eager, to resort to violence to bring about their desired ends. Now, this does not comport with the Christianity of Christ, who turned the other cheek, who told Peter to put down your sword, who said to love your neighbor as yourself, who said the fruit of the Spirit was gentleness and patience. Doesn't sound like Jesus at all. And yet, they really thought they were part of God's army, doing God's will, and they had to be militant to the point of taking up arms and killing people to achieve their goals. That's the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. But I want to take it even further. See, because here's the thing. I'm trying to be very patient. As I say, from the KKK to white Christian nationalism, I imagine some viewers, some listeners are like, duh, I've been thinking that all along. Okay, cool. But give me some specifics. Give me some examples. Don't just say they're both racist, they're both white supremacists. Well, yeah, we know that. But give me some specific parallels. That's what I'm going to get into here. What I'm doing right now is I'm laying the historical groundwork. By the way, I can't believe this is free for y'all. This is knowledge that if you listen to this, you're going to know more than 95% of the people in the world about US white Christian nationalism. And I'm giving it to you for free. I don't mind doing that. But if you do want to support this work, become a paid subscriber at jamartisby.substack.com. Also, tune into the Vision Casting meeting Sunday, December 7th at 4 p.m. Registration link in the show notes. Get this. That same guy, William J. Simmons, who started who was the leader of the rebirth of the Klan. He becomes the Grand Dragon or Imperial Wizard. And 7 years later, in 1922, there's an interview that gets published in the New York Times, and it's asking William J. Simmons, well, what is the Klan about? Here's what he says. The Ku Klux Klan admits membership to none but native-born, white, Gentile, Protestant Americans, whose statement of principles was a restoration of the fundamental principles of American democracy as embodied in the Constitution of the United States, an organization whose code of conduct was Protestant Christianity. Do you pick up what he's putting down? Check this out. Ku Klux Klan admits membership. All right. So this is a fraternal organization, and I'm going to get to their initiation questions that they asked to potential members. But Simmons is saying, who can be a member? No one except native born. Well, what's the opposite of native born? Immigrant. So he's saying the Klan doesn't take immigrants. You have to have been born in the United States. Okay, cool. Well, there were a lot of black people born in the United States. Is that cool, William J. Simmons? No. Because the next part, he says, native born white. Y'all, this is why I say the white in white Christian nationalism. We're going to make those parallels in a second. But in the Klan ideology, yeah, we know it's white supremacist, we know it's racist, but here it is explicit by the leader of the second coming of the KKK, native born white. That's the project. Isn't it interesting that those are the first descriptors that he says? He's got this long list. The first one, native born white people. That's who he's talking about. But not all. He talks about religion. Native born white Gentile. Here's the anti-Semitic part. And let me just jump ahead a little bit. We are seeing fractures on the far right due to anti-Semitism, right? Was it Tucker Carlson who had Nick Fuentes on his show? Nick Fuentes is an avowed anti-Semite. And then you have some sectors on the right who are like, wait a minute, that's not okay. And you got other sectors on the right saying, what's the big deal? We're just hearing him out. But the ideology of the Klan was thoroughly anti-Semitic. That's why I mentioned the lynching of Leo Frank in 1915. That's part of it. They saw themselves not just against black people, but also against Jewish people. And then it continues on the religious front. Native born, white, Gentile, Protestant Americans. So that's a loaded term. Number one, he's implying, obviously, you're going to be Christian. You're not going to be an atheist. You're not going to be agnostic. You're certainly not going to be Jewish or Muslim. You have to be Christian, but a certain kind of Christian. You have to be Protestant. In the 1920s, in the Jim Crow era, white Protestants did not have much affection for Catholics. They did not like the Pope. And so you couldn't be Catholic and join the Klan. This was for Protestant. And then he says Americans, which is kind of redundant when he says native born and white. We already know who he means. But that's who he considers true Americans. They're native born, they're white, They're Gentile, they're Protestant, and that's what makes an American. We could stop right there. You have enough to chew on just with that one partial sentence from the founder of the second coming of the Ku Klux Klan. Is this helpful? Is this informative for y'all? I'm it looks like we're live, and I hope we are. Uh I just want to know, you know, chime in here. So it says share. What if I share this? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not gonna mess with it right now. All right. So point being, let's keep going because his statement's not done yet. Check this out. Um, Native born white Gentile Protestant Americans whose statement of principles was a restoration. Okay, whose statement of principles. In other words, their operating ethos. Listen to this word restoration. Make America great again. You catch it? There's always this idea of going back to some mythical past. There was some era with the KKK and with white Christian nationalism, there was some era that was better than now. And if we want to fix what's wrong now, we have to go back. As Simmons says, we have to have a restoration. As the modern movement says, we have to make America great again. But there's always this idea of going back, which is, by the way, regressive, not progressive. It's regress. It's pulling you backwards rather than progress in moving forward. A restoration of the fundamental principles of American democracy. Golly. If they don't take every single word and redefine it, why are they touting democracy when you don't want black people or women to vote? You only want white men and really, if we're getting down to it, wealthy white men to participate in the political project at all. So when they say democracy, they may be talking about voting, but they're not talking about you voting. They're not talking about a multiracial participatory democracy. Do you hear what I'm saying? So bring that forward to the present day. I'm skipping ahead. All right, I had it nice and segmented. We're still in the historical section, but I can't not give this to you right now because you got to understand this unbroken line almost between the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan and modern day white Christian nationalism, because when white Christian nationalists speak of democracy, they also are not speaking of a multiracial participatory democracy. You have now a right-wing Reformed Christian movement characterized by people like Doug Wilson and now Pete Hegseth, who's Secretary of Defense. No, I'm not calling it Secretary of War. Stop that dumb stuff. Who are saying, you know what, maybe women shouldn't vote. Maybe spouses, wives shouldn't vote. Maybe it's only the quote head of the household. Maybe we should just have a household vote. And if you're saying, oh, they're just extremists, they're just musing, they're just spouting off at the mouth. People said that about Project 2025. And look where we are. They are implementing Project 2025 chapter and subheading and bullet point by bullet point. So if you don't think that some of these folks would run at the chance of repealing the 19th Amendment, repealing significant parts of the Reconstruction Amendment, which they're already doing in the form of challenging the Voting Rights Act clauses, right? I'm just saying. All right. So they don't mean democracy like you mean democracy. And then it says embodied in the Constitution of the United States. Now, these folks are on top of a Confederate monument that rebelled against the Constitution and rebelled against the United States. And now the founder of the Klan is saying, we want a restoration of the fundamental principles as embodied in the Constitution of the United States. Make it make sense. Who are you for? Are you for this failed rebellion that lasted 4 years? That did not have the Constitution of the United States. It had a Constitution of the Confederate States of America. Or are you for the Constitution of the United States? It doesn't matter to them because either way, they're going to import their own meaning to it. But it's just, to me, the irony screams here. You're uplifting the Constitution of the United States while you're on top of a monument dedicated to rebelling against the United States. And then it ends, an organization, meaning the United States, whose code of conduct was Protestant Christianity. You see what I'm saying? They believed the United States was founded as a Christian nation. Not just any Christian, Protestant Christianity. He had to throw that in there a second time in that statement. And what do they mean? Code of conduct was, they mean that the United States was blessed by God to the extent that the founders and the early residents of the United States, European, that they followed Protestant Christianity, and to the extent that they followed God's law, the nation prospered. And if you want the nation to prosper again, if you want a restoration, then you got to get back to these fundamental Christian principles. You got to practice your religion, which was not the religion of Jesus. So that's the description of the Klan's ideology. But I do want to make one more point before going on to talk about the modern day parallels in more detail. All of this was undergirded by religion. This horrific, dehumanizing, racist, white supremacist ideology was undergirded by a perversion of what they called Christianity. That's what we see today with white Christian nationalism too. So check this out. You can go all the way back. Shout out to Soong-Chan Rah and Mark Charles. If you haven't read their book, Unsettling Truths, Don't Walk, Run. It's called Unsettling Truths. If you want that book, go to the Justice Library. That is my bookshop.org page. Go to bookshop.org, check out my bookshop there, and there's something called the Justice Library. Unsettling Truths is there, along with literally dozens of other excellent books on this topic and more. So they talk about the papal bull Dum Diversus from Pope Nicholas V, and that papal bull, which was a letter, initiated a doctrine that any new lands, quote, discovered by Europeans could be rightfully, meaning God said it was okay, taken over and its people enslaved. Why? Because they were pagans. So the Pope is saying, hey, any new lands you discover, quote unquote, go in there, take their natural resources, exploit the people for labor, and because they're pagans, it's all okay. This is what shaped colonial and imperialistic efforts for centuries, on down to the colonizing of the United States. I've talked in my first book, The Color of Compromise, about 1667. The Virginia Assembly passes a law saying that baptism would not emancipate an enslaved Native American, African, or mixed race person. Religion, race, politics, all wrapped in one. You had things like the Curse of Ham, which said supposedly that the descendants of Ham were, by divine curse, consigned to perpetual servitude. In other words, that Africans had as their lot by God the place of being enslaved to white people. Horrible twisting of scripture. So all of that is going on. I just want to underscore the fact that these weren't just kind of political or social beliefs. These were religious beliefs too. I'm going to give you one more example because I told y'all I did a deep dive into this stuff, and you will not believe some of the things that I found. So one of the things that I found, and this is from my last Substack article, the 10 questions every new Klansman had to answer. This is disgusting stuff, but I do it for your knowledge. So what happened was There was a whole initiation process. Part of the Klan was secrecy. This is why they wore robes and hoods. It was partially to disguise their identity, even though in a lot of places in the United States you didn't have to. You could be a sheriff, you could be a politician, you could be a pastor and be in the Klan and still be considered an upright citizen. That was often the case. But the garb was also ceremonial. There's big pomp and circumstance, just like the rebirth of the Klan, where they do this elaborate ceremony on top of Stone Mountain, Georgia. They stood a lot on ceremony. And so part of the ceremony was, hey, we've got these 10 questions, and you've got to pass the test. You got to answer these to the satisfaction of current Klan members. Now, mind you, while they are answering the questions, the candidate, as they called them, they had to kneel. And it says in the bylaws, which I searched out and found the primary source, it said, quote, from the bylaws, the candidate must kneel with his right hand raised to heaven and his left hand resting on the Bible. Don't miss that. Right hand raised to heaven, left hand on the Bible. Everything they were about to answer was done under the sight of God, intentionally. First question is, have you ever been rejected from another Klan chapter, basically? So they didn't want to admit a Klan member who wasn't in good standing with some other clavern, as they were called. But then the second question, are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Radical Republican Party or either of the organizations known as the Loyal League and the Grand Army of the Republic? So here's what they're getting at. The Radical Republicans passed the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, emancipation, voting rights, birthright citizenship. Do not pay attention to the party name, pay attention to the party platform. Modern day Republicans like to claim they were the party of Lincoln. No, you weren't. They like to claim we're the party of emancipation. No, you weren't. You have the same label, you have the same party name, but your platform is completely the opposite. Don't let them fool you. I'm not going to go into that. It's a dumb argument. It's not a good faith one. If people think that's actually true, they don't know, not even history. It's just basic logic. And I'm not getting into that. But here's my point. The Klan was asking candidates, have you ever been a member of the Party of Emancipation? You had to say no. Here's the third question. Are you opposed to the principles and policy of the Radical Party? By the way, isn't it interesting? What is radical is emancipating enslaved people. What is radical is giving them the right to vote. What is radical is saying that if you are born here, you are a citizen here. That's what they're calling radical. And to this day, who do they call the radicals? The people who want to abolish ICE, which if we had listened years ago, maybe we wouldn't be having ICE and Customs and Border Patrol abducting people off the streets. Y'all, I don't know. You get me fired up here. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, but sometimes I surprise myself with my own passion here. I'm just saying, this is the power of history. I never set out to become a historian, but it was during the Black Lives Matter movement, 2014, 2015, when people were talking about policing, and I was like, what is the deal? Why is everyone... I mean, I knew it as a black man in America. I had been followed by police. I had been pulled over. All of my black male friends, we have horror stories of it. So I knew that from individual experience, but activists were talking about something bigger and something deeper and something much, much longer. And it was in studying history that I finally started to understand why they were so against policing as it took shape in the United States, because it was rooted in slave patrols. And you can go back and look at the badges. They look like sheriff badges from the 19th century, but they say slave patrol. And so modern day policing is rooted in the control and the brutalizing and the murder of black people. I'm not saying every cop. I'm not saying in every instance. I'm just saying the ethos, the way it evolved, its roots are in that historical reality. And so that's why I get fired up about history now. But because when we study those roots, we can understand the fruits and we can do something to change it. So this is why, I'm reading through these 10 questions that Ku Klux Klan candidates get asked, and I'm getting fired up. The fourth question: did you belong to the Federal Army during the late war and fight against the South during the existence of the same? Just say it. Just make it plain. Did you fight for the Union? Did you fight for the Union against the Confederates? That's what they're asking. And if you did, you can't join the Klan. Isn't that interesting? They want this restoration of the Constitution and democracy. But if you fought against the Confederacy that broke away from all that, you can't be in the Klan. Question 5: are you opposed to Negro equality, both social and political? Are you opposed to Negro equality, both social and political? And question 6: are you in favor of a white man's government in this country? Are you in favor of a white man's government in this country? So you had to be opposed to Negro equality, both social and political. Social meaning no integration. And they created this boogeyman, especially in Birth of a Nation, of rapacious black men who wanted to ravage white women. That led to countless lynchings where they unjustly accused black men of crimes against white women. So they were particularly concerned about desegregation and integration, but also politically. They didn't think black men, black people in general, should have any political power, let alone political leadership or elected office. So they were hopping mad in the Reconstruction era when scores upon scores of black men were elected to political office, all the way from the Senate to local postmaster. And they were like, that's a step backwards. We got to restore white rule. And that's that second question, or question number 6: are you in favor of a white man's government in this country? By the way, I have an awesome, informative reel on Instagram and Facebook about this very topic. I make the case that the reason why we have a MAGA movement is backlash against having our first black president, which a lot of people have made that point before, but I also connect it to these questions and to this history of the Klan that never thought black people should have any sort of political power. So it's not just that recent history in the 21st century. It has deep, deep, long roots historically as well. Let's keep going. Question 7: are you in favor of constitutional liberty and a government of equitable laws instead of a government of violence and oppression? Okay. Modern day white Christian nationalism relies on fear and grievance to motivate its followers. They're doing the same thing here in the Ku Klux Klan. Are you in favor of a constitutional liberty instead of a government of violence and oppression? What government of violence and oppression are they talking about? They're talking about the United States federal government. And what they're claiming is the federal government is violent and oppressive toward us good white Southern boys, to our Southern way of life, to our heritage. And what they're saying is, don't you want a government of equitable laws where everybody's treated fairly? Which also, by the way, sounds very similar to the anti-DEI efforts of modern day white Christian nationalism and this present regime, because they're claiming, don't you want a meritocracy? Don't you want everything to be equal? Shouldn't color not matter? And it's this oppressive federal government with these DEI policies and these corporations with these DEI policies that are oppressing us good white people. I told you. Echoes of the past in the present. Question 8: are you in favor of maintaining the constitutional rights of the South? Question 9: are you in favor of the re-enfranchisement and emancipation of white men of the South? Man, look, I'm not a physically violent person, but when I read this line, I wanted to slap somebody. Are you in favor of the re-enfranchisement, and listen to this word, emancipation of the white men of the South? You don't get to use the word emancipation when 50 years ago you were literally enslaving people who needed a constitutional amendment to be legally emancipated. You are not in slavery, white men of the South. You do not get to use the language of emancipation. And then here's that language again: restitution, going back. Restitution of the Southern people to all their rights, and listen to this, alike property. So if you joined a war against the United States and you lost any physical property, and by the way, they considered enslaved people property too, as a candidate for the member of the Klan, you had to say, oh, they should restore all of that property. Get out of here. And then lastly, do you believe in the inalienable right of self-preservation of the people against the exercise of arbitrary and unlicensed power? This is violence. Do you believe in the inalienable right of self-preservation? This is where you get all these gun fanatics screaming about the Second Amendment, which they're calling an inalienable right. And they're saying it's about self-preservation, and they're saying it's about guarding against arbitrary and unlicensed power. What power is that? Again, the power of the federal government, namely to enforce civil rights. Reconstruction ended when, in a political deal to put Rutherford B. Hayes in office during a close election of the presidency, the powers that be agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South and therefore stop enforcing the Reconstruction Amendments and the civil rights of still newly emancipated black people. It had only been 12 years since the Civil War. So what the Klan is saying, this is arbitrary and unlicensed power, not only then, because this is now 1915, but against any sort of civil rights progress, whether that's voting rights for women, whether that is opposing, they were trying to put forth anti-lynching laws in Congress, which didn't get passed till the 21st century, just a couple of years ago, actually. So they're saying that's arbitrary and unlicensed power. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Is this making sense? I'm hoping this is helpful. I'm hoping we got some history lovers out here, and I'm hoping that you are seeing how this ideology is a connection to modern day white Christian nationalism. Now, let me make that connection explicit. You remember what William J. Simmons said about native born white Gentile Protestant Americans? Keep that in mind as I read this. This is from Philip Gorski and Samuel Perry in their book, The Flag and the Cross. They talk about white Christian nationalism as a deep story. And it says, white Christian nationalism's deep story goes something like this. America was founded as a Christian nation. Remember that Protestant American thing from the Klan? By who? White men, remember, Gentile, native-born white, who were traditional Christians, again, that Christian language, who based the nation's founding documents on Christian principles. And guess what? That's what William J. Simmons says, that the fundamental principles of American democracy, as embodied in the Constitution, whose code of conduct was Protestant Christianity. Are you seeing the parallels here? This is the good stuff. This is where the history has present-day ramifications. And it says, the deep story says the United States is blessed by God, which is why it's been so successful. It's blessed because people adhere to Protestant Christianity. And the nation has a special role to play in God's plan for humanity, but these blessings are threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences, both inside and outside our borders. That's the deep story of white Christian nationalism. That story sounds a heck of a lot like the description of the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan. That's what I'm saying. What is white Christian nationalism? Let me tell you how the Public Religion Research Institute gauges it. So white Christian nationalism is not a binary, you are or you aren't. It's a spectrum. And in order to determine where a person is on that spectrum, they have these scale questions, these diagnostic questions. Some of these questions are, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. And lastly, U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. Now, it's a scale, so you can, strongly agree or strongly disagree and everything in between. And based on how you answer those questions, you are determined to be a white Christian nationalist adherent, a sympathizer, a skeptic, or a rejecter. Adherents are the most diehard extremist white Christian nationalists. That's only about 10% of the population. Sympathizers are about 20%. And so they believe the same things, just not as strongly, but they vote the same. So that's 30% all told. Meanwhile, there's skeptics who are like, I don't know about this, but some of it I think I agree with, but I don't know about this. And then there's 29% who are just rejectors, like outright, no, that's where I am. And here's the thing, we were talking about violence, the Bible, the flag, the sword. Today it might be the Bible, a flag, and an AR-15, an assault rifle. Why? Nearly 4 in 10 Christian nationalism adherents, the most extreme, and 3 in 10 sympathizers, right next to them, agree that, quote, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save this country. Past in the present. Remember when these uh, questions, the questions for candidates to the Klan, do you believe in the inalienable right of self-preservation of the people against the exercise of arbitrary and unlicensed power? That's the same thing as American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. It goes back to my original statement. There is a direct line from the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan to modern day white Christian nationalism. I'm just making the parallels for you. And let me give you one example in action, a recent example. So, Trump's racism has been well known and well documented for years, from the lawsuits he and his daddy faced in the 1970s for discriminating against potential black renters in their apartment buildings, to his egregious full page ad in newspapers about the so-called Central Park Five, now the exonerated Five, to his early 2010s birther conspiracy saying that President Obama wasn't really born in the United States, to 2015 when he announces his candidacy for the Republican nomination by saying Mexicans are sending criminals and rapists over the border. And now the latest in a long and sordid line of racism, he is bashing on Somali immigrants. So in a meeting earlier this week, the president said Somalis should, quote, go back to where they came from, and their country is no good for a reason. And he didn't stop there. The president of the United States said, I don't want them in our country. I'll be honest with you. He said the U.S. would go the wrong way if we keep taking garbage into our country. That sounds a lot like Klan ideology. It sounds a lot like the deep story of white Christian nationalism. That this nation, the blessings are being threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences, both inside and outside our borders. So the president is saying these Somali immigrants, they're not true Americans. Even if they're citizens, he's not going to take it. He's not going to accept them as true Americans. And it goes back to William J. Simmons. Who does the Klan admit? Native-born white. You can't be an immigrant, much less an immigrant from an African nation. This is why I make this statement. There is a direct line from the ideology of the Ku Klux Klan to modern day white Christian nationalism. Um, Let me make a couple final notes here. Be careful, be very careful about making present day parallels to the past. I told you I was hesitant to make this comparison until I had done the research. And my case in point is how people want to compare everything to Hitler. If something's evil, if something's bad, if something is white supremacist, they say Hitler. But they don't go any further. They don't give any real analysis. And the result is you minimize the evil of Hitler and what he represents and what his regime was about. And you also make facile comparisons that really don't stand up to scrutiny. There could be better comparisons, but you're off there spouting off at the mouth at the one historical example of pure evil that you can reference. So I didn't want to do that talking about the Klan and white Christian nationalism. So one of the things that people make an error in is just talking about the similarities without talking about the differences. So I've talked about the similarities between the KKK and white Christian nationalism. There are some differences. So, for instance, that Gentile part, or rather, yeah, the Gentile part is part of it. You'll have some Jewish people involved in the white Christian nationalist movement. They're not down with the Christian part, but they're down with the political project of white Christian nationalism. And you also have a difference when it says Protestant Americans in the Jim Crow era Klan. Now you have plenty of Catholics involved in white Christian nationalism. We have not talked nearly enough about the strand of white right wing extremist Catholicism that J.D. Vance represents, that over half of the Supreme Court justices are Catholic, but in a particular way, the Amy Coney Barrett's of the world way of representing Catholicism. So that is a difference between the KKK's ideology and modern white Christian nationalism. Modern white Christian nationalism will admit Catholics, and gladly in a sense, because the Catholic Church still has a lot of power in a lot of different ways. So there's some discontinuity there. So if you're going to make a parallel between the present and the past, don't just emphasize the similarities, emphasize the differences as well. Because one of the things I always say, and we need to stop saying this in the national conversation, is that history repeats itself. No, it doesn't. It's never one to one. There's always continuity and discontinuity. And if we gloss over the discontinuity, we miss important nuances and important lessons that the past can give us in the present. So instead, I say, history rhymes. There are echoes of the past in the present. But that is not to say history repeats itself. So, in conclusion, the Klan may be past, but the ideology is not. And the church and our nation must decide which story it will sanctify. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Justice Briefing. If you want to support my work, the best way to do it is become a paid subscriber at jamartisby.substack.com. And you can hear more about this larger project that I'm doing at the intersection of faith, history, and justice that is Tisby Media this Sunday, December 7th at 4 p.m. Registration is free. Join me live online to hear more about it. Catch you next time on the Justice Briefing. Thank you.